Hi, I've been playing this Napoleonic Wargame, Montmiriail, Vauchamps, 1814. The Guards lead the attack. I've been playing it quite a bit, so I thought I'd do a video, talk about how the game plays, and talk about the things I like about the game. So this is a Ziploc bag game, sort of folio game. It is part of the, I'm going to try and pronounce this right, Jours de Gloire series, or as I would like to call it, the Days of Glory series. And I've got quite a few games in this series. They're mostly published by, like this one, by Canon and Carton, or they're published in the Vae Victis magazine. And there's quite a few in this series, which is one of the things I like about this game, is that once you've learnt the rules, there are many battles and folio games that use those same rules. So the designer is Frederica Bay. The artwork is Pascal da Silva. Hope I pronounced your names right. Apologies if not. On the back here, the units, 1 strength point equals 150 horse, 200 infantry or 4 cannon, 1 turn for 1 hour, 300 meters per hex, 4 scenarios lasting 7 to 12 hour turns, 4 to 8 hours game play. I would agree with that. I've played all the scenarios multiple times, and that sort of feels about right to me. Complexity, 7 out of 10. Yeah, I probably would agree with that as well. I've played a lot of games in this series. I wouldn't say they're overly complex, but they are, 7 out of 10 sort of feels right. So that's sort of an overview of the game. Let's have a look at the components first, and then we'll have a look at actually how the game plays. So I've laid the map out here with the Vauchamps scenario in mind. The map is double-sided. It's a quite nice thick paper stock. Normally I would play with plexiglass over the map, but because I was doing this bit of film to show you about the game, I took the plexi away so it doesn't glare so much. The artwork of the map is lovely. It's really nice, and there's a great visual language to the map, so it's very clear the different hills, very clear the different roads, the wooded areas, and the actual sort of habitats within the game. So there's Vauchamps over there, and yeah, it reads very, very well. You have a turn track along the bottom, it's always useful, and you have a guide to all the different types of terrain, again very useful, and the different levels for the different hills as well. Now, what I like about this map, as much as anything, as much as the artwork, is that, as you can see, it's a bit smaller than a lot of wargame maps. According to the game here, 59 by 41 centimeters. So, if to give you some sense of scale, if that's the rule book, it's basically 4 times the size of the rule book. What this means is that it's a smaller footprint compared to a lot of Napoleonic games, which is great. It means that I can have it set up on the table kind of almost permanently, and it doesn't, I have it set up on my art table that I do my artwork on, and it sits nicely to the side so that I can continue working and come back to the game throughout the week or a series of weeks, because the game scenarios do take a little while to play. Like I said, 4 to 8 hours sort of feels about right. So the shorter scenario, which is this scenario, the Vauchamps scenario, I think you probably can do that in 4 hours. The scenario, the Montmiriail scenario, just probably take a bit longer. And that's on the reverse side. And it uses exactly the same sort of visual language of the map. So yeah, map is absolutely wonderful. Really delight to play on. The artwork is lovely, very clear, brilliant, absolutely brilliant. So let's have a look at some of the counters. The counters are on the sort of regular size. You will need tweezers for the game. There is a small amount of stacking in the game. Normally, really 3 counters make a stack. So here, for example, we've got a stack with some artillery pieces, 2 artillery, and then underneath should be an infantry. Yeah, there's a foot. So a little amount of stacking. The stock of the counters is, as you would expect, very nice. They punched out perfectly well, no problem there at all. Again, the readability of the counters is good, so it's very clear. Probably can't see that too well, but the The counters have all the numerics for the gameplay mechanics that you need. Again, counters read extremely well. They flip over for disorganized, and you've got a nice white bar to show that. The artwork of the counters is awesome. So you've got pieces of art for all the different kind of counters in the game, and there are quite a few. So this is cavalry, and the same with foot and artillery, and that gives a nice sort of flavour, historical flavour to the game. That they've used artwork for the counters. I really like that, especially in Napoleonic era games, where they use artwork as opposed to symbols or something. That's really good. You'll notice that the counters facing within the hexes is really important in this game. So they face, well, I'll just describe simply as the corner of the hexes, and that shows their orientation. So the front hexes are the front for this one here, stack front 2, and the rest are classed as rear facing hexes, and that's important when it comes to combat and it comes to line of sight and things like that. So great job on the counters. They're beautifully illustrated, high readability. Yeah, another great job. Definitely the components of this game are very high quality. And the game, I bought the game here in the UK from, I think pretty sure it's from Second Chance Games, and it really was not an expensive game. And obviously you get effectively 2 games for the price of one. You've been Vauchamps and Montmiriail. So excellent quality components. Let's have a quick look at the player aid. So player aid is in English and in French. This is a French game. I quite like that actually, because it's Napoleonic's game. So to me that adds a little bit of the strange as it sounds, a little bit of flavour to the game. But again, you've got and there aren't many charts in this game, I should say. So you've got your modifiers for shock, which is basically sort of close combat, and charge, which is what the cavalry would be doing. So even here, for example, that's the chart for that, and you've got the same chart. Let's move the player aid up a little bit in French. So if you're an English speaker, you simply just refer to this one, and they're colour coordinated. So this kind of tone here is English, and the bluer tone would be in French language. And then the bottom, you've got artillery fire modifiers, and again the French and the English side by side. Readability of the charts, yep, brilliant, really good. Honestly, didn't have any problems reading the charts at all. The flip side, you have all the modifiers for the terrain, again in English and in French, and very straightforward with this game. There are a handful of different terrain types, and I would say that the terrain types, they're no more complex than you would expect for the sort of level of complexity of this game. So I found them, very straightforward, no problem at all. So a lovely player aid. It is double-sided. You only get one, so unfortunately you won't be able to put it under your plexi, because you will keep referring to the terrain. You could take a photocopy, I guess, and put it under the plexi if you prefer to play with those player aids in that manner. I know some people do. Finally, some of the other counters in the game, sort of to aid gameplay. There are different colour tones, so they're always orange for these sort of gameplay counters. So you've got an orders counter, and I'll come to how those work. These are absolutely crucial in the game. You can use these a lot, the orders and no orders, square formation, and a route. So with with all the counters actually, they're in French, but the rulebook explains to you which counters to use when. And again, no problem at all. And they're double-sided, so that's the route counter, and that's the square when you put your infantry foot into squares. So excellent little set of counters, no problem at all. You will need a couple of D10s. The game doesn't come with any D10s, so you'll need a couple of those. I probably would say you could get away with one if you've only got one spare, but you will need a couple of D10s as well. So let's have a look at the rulebook. Firstly, this is version 1814. There have been some more games in the series since this game was published. I think the Battle of Issy, which was in C3I magazine, I think that's the most recent. In fact, I'm not sure when this game was published actually. I don't think it says anywhere. But this has certainly been. This is one of the most recent. I'll go out on a limb and say you can check on Board Game Geek, of course. So the rulebook, it's nice, semi-glossy sort of paper stock, stapled, full colour, and I'll go through the rules, after we've had a look at the book. But full colour, it's very nicely laid out. It's very clear. I've read the rulebook. I've read these rules and subsequent, other earlier rule books in this series numerous times and never had any problems reading the rules. Occasionally there's a little bit of French that creeps in. So the rulebook is in English. Occasionally there's a little bit of French that creeps in. There's an example here on the stacking, but it's easy to work out what they mean, to be honest with you. Rulebook's written very, very cleanly, very, very clearly. There's the odd rule that I've had to read, multiple times just to thoroughly understand it, and I'll come to that when we talk about the gameplay. But yeah, I mean, the rulebook goes through movement, it goes through artillery, it goes through charging, goes through firing as part of the artillery. Gives you examples, a few examples of play. For example, with the cavalry charge, disorder, goes through that, and then towards the end of the rules. So fundamentally, you've got 12 pages of rules, one of which is pretty much, it's an introduction page. Then you go into the scenarios, and there's a little bit of historical content. The scenarios. Basically, what you've got is the scenario around Montmiriail on the 1st of February 1814, and then you've got the second scenario of Vauchamps on the 14th of Feb 1814, so just a few days later. Then what you have within those two scenarios, you have two hypothetical scenarios, sort of what-if scenarios, and they're quite good to play. I really enjoy playing those. I would play personally, I played the historical scenarios first, then I had to go at the what-if. The Vauchamps what-if, for example, Napoleon enters the battle not so early, and Blucher starts in the battle, whereas in the historical one, Napoleon starts very early, and Blucher doesn't start until the second turn, I think, from memory. 10 o'clock turn. Yeah, that is maybe even the third turn, actually, now that I mention it. They're quite good. They're quite good, fun to play, those what-if scenarios, but they are a sort of variant on the main two scenarios. So really, you get 4 scenarios for sure. They're kind of, you get 2 scenarios, and then you get these 2 what-if scenarios as well. Saying that though, the scenarios are, they take. Vauchamps takes, I want to say, 4 hours, and Montmiriail takes around 7 hours. They're big, meaty scenarios. There's plenty of gameplay within those scenarios. So very nice rule book, very clearly laid out, very well written. I'm sure it was written in French first, and this is an English translation, very well translated. If that being the case, it is a great rule book. It's definitely. I had very, very, very few problems reading this rule book, and was a joy to read. And how I play a lot of games, especially if I'm playing the game first solitaire to learn the rules, I will play the game and have the rule book in front of me the whole time, next to each other, and I enjoy playing that way very much. That part is part of the fun of playing games for me. It's great rule book. So let's have a look at some of the rules in the game, and I'm not going to go through every single rule in the game. The rulebook will do a much better job of explaining the rules than I possibly could. But I'll highlight some of the key rules that I think, or I feel when I'm playing the game, really define this game, make this game a bit different than other games of the war games, irrespective of whether they're Napoleonic or not. The game is a chit pool system, so for every sort of formation you would have a chit. This is the chit that belongs to these guys, these counters, and the chit goes in the cup, and then you randomly draw a chit out, and then you can activate, I'll call it, or attempt to anyway, the associated counters with that. What's interesting in this game is that a lot of these formations will have two chits that go in the cup. So even though the game might only have, for example, this game, I think Vauchamps, as I've got set up here, has 7 turns, something like that. Those turns can take a little while to play because you've got numerous chits in the cup, and there's duplicates for those chits. The other, and I would say I love that system. I'm a big fan of chit pool games. They give a sort of certain sense of uncertainty, more drama. And I would say that even though this is a 2-player game, and this is a 2-player game, it helps the game become more solitaire friendly with the chit pool system. The other key mechanic in terms of how a turn works is around orders. And orders are where basically, in a nutshell, your formations, your groups of troops, so here, for example, we've got French, and here we've got the coalition here. They will not always do what you want them to do. They will not always follow the orders that that you give them, which is a very interesting mechanic. So, for example, here I've got Napoleon. Every turn you have a certain number of orders that Napoleon can give to his different formations. You don't have enough for all the formations that you would have, so you have to pick and choose who you give orders to. If the formation has orders, for example here, then they can move, they can fire, they can charge if they're cavalry, etc. And they will do that. If, for example, here on the coalition side, they don't have orders, then there are different tests you can do to see either if they will take orders from their from the chit that is used to activate them, and you would roll a dice, and this has got a 4, so it needs a 4 or more. Sorry, 4 or less, I think, to see if they will take orders. But the reality is that when these units here, these counters here, don't have orders, through the dice rolling, sometimes you will be able to get them to take orders and do what you want them to do. Sorry. And sometimes you won't. So you have to think very carefully about the formations you give orders to and the formations you don't. And that's a real key mechanic of this game. I have played the game, interestingly, without that mechanic, just to see, well, just to learn or refresh my memory about how combat works, how charging works. And I felt that the orders system adds a huge amount to the game, and it makes the game really interesting. It makes the game very unpredictable, and it makes you, as the sort of commander for each side, make some pretty hard decisions. Not so much maybe at the beginning of the game, but when you've got lots of formations on the map, and you simply do not have enough orders to give them all. So that was yeah, that's really cool. I've probably not done the best job of describing that mechanic, but it is brilliantly detailed in the rulebook, and it's very clear and very simple how that mechanic works. And it is honestly, it's not overly complicated at all. There are still some if units don't have orders, and you don't want to see if they will take orders from their commander, then there are still certain things they will do, which is again sort of fully detailed in the rules. One of those, for example, is they will have reduced movement. So even if they don't have orders, they will move. You'll be able to move them, but just at a reduced rate. Squares, bringing your foot into squares. Now I can't find a square token. It's very straightforward. You either put them into square voluntary. Part of that is a square one, when you activate them, or they can go into square if they pass a certain test as a result of being charged by a horse. All the counters will, by and large, certainly the infantry and the horse counters will have numerics on them to pass the two types of tests that there are. They are used quite a lot in the game, so they're cohesion tests and engagement tests. The rules will detail whether at certain points you have to take a cohesion test or an engagement test. You will be doing that quite a lot, I have found. So the game certainly has, it's not a bucket of dice game, but you will be rolling dice to see if, you know, the counters will take certain tests and accept those, and so forth, depending again on whether you've given them orders or not, and depending on what you want them to do. So cavalry, for example, can countercharge. You would take a test to see if they could do that. Infantry can go into a square. You would take a test to see if they could do that. Movement, very straightforward. Very, very straightforward. And even though there are a few different terrain types on the map, I didn't find that was too cumbersome at all. You can move in stacks, you can move independently. It's really straightforward. Zonal control and facing, as I mentioned before, facing is super important. So as I've done there, you kind of, maybe less if you're playing solitaire, but same if you're playing two-player, you've got to pay a lot of attention to the facing. I would describe the game as a game where you need to be pretty tidy with the counters and pretty organised with the counters, because you have a lot of formations. The colour tone between some of the formations isn't super apparent sometimes. So these are coalition counters, these are French counters. You might be able to see on the camera they're a slightly different shade or not. So a certain level of tidiness with counters is important, especially within the stacks, especially around facing. I'm pretty sure from memory the artillery pieces need to be on the top of a stack. So there's a certain amount of housekeeping required, or tidy keeping required with the game to make the game flowing and enjoyable, especially if you're playing two-player. And the reason facing is important is because being able to attack from the flank or from the rear is super useful. There is no flank technically; it's all rear, except for the forward-facing two hexes. So these counters here are facing this way. They're the two forward-facing. That means that is a rear hex for that particular type of counter, and the ones around the back obviously as well. Combat, regular combat is it's again very straightforward, as is artillery combat. On the player aid, you have a couple of charts. Honestly, well, I say a couple of charts, two really, that you're going to be using depending on what type of combat you're doing. So charging, these are all your modifiers that you would go through. And that's the dice roll that you would take. It is very quick and fast flowing combat system, which is good. Interestingly, for example, in artillery, bear in mind this is a D10 game and you're only rolling one dice, you need a 9 or more to do any damage or to have any impact on the enemy counter, which basically means that you add up the bonuses, which is the strength of the artillery piece. And I often will put two artillery pieces in the same hex, just to increase that sort of power of that hex firing. It does put that hex at a slight potential risk if it's charged by cavalry or engaged by infantry, for example. So there's those sort of mechanics that you have to weigh up as the commander. Cavalry, again, charging is very straightforward. They move at a slightly reduced number of hexes. Interestingly, on the cavalry, one mechanics that I like a lot is that once the cavalry have done their combat, they have to take a cohesion test. What this means in reality is that once your cavalry have charged, there's a pretty good chance, depending on the cavalry type, that they will be flipped over and have failed because they failed their cohesion tests, and that's just the reality. There's a chance they may pass, for example. So you have to use your cavalry charges really sensibly, because you'll charge your cavalry into the enemy foot or artillery, and then once that charge is done, great, then they can be very prone to the enemy. So you have to be very careful and think very carefully about using your cavalry, which I think is good and fitting to the sort of historic period. The one, this is a small niggle I have, and it's just a personal one. I have read a few comments on Board Game Geek. A few other people share the same thing, and this is around I'll leave the map actually. This is around the pursuit mechanics. So often you find, as a result of combat, you're pushing the enemy back, and then you're pursuing after them, and this can go on quite a bit depending on what type of dice roll you get. And what I have found in the game is sometimes it feels just a bit OTT. It feels like I'm pushing I've charged my cavalry at the infantry, and they're pulling back and they're pulling back, and I'm charging them again, depending on the dice rolls that I get. It's just a niggle. Sometimes it feels just a little bit overcooked for me personally, and I know a few people use some house rules to try sort of pull that in a little bit. That's literally the only rule when I've played the game where I've gone, not 100% sure about that. And it's simply the pursuit. It's simply the pursuit. Although, you know, sometimes, like I said, in reality, if you're charging cavalry in that example, then you'd have to roll to see if they, if they keep in formation, you know. So you'd have to take a cohesion test. So, you know, I kind of get it. You're rolling to see if that's possible or not. But it's just a quibble. It's the only rule that I've come across. So morale, very straightforward. If units flipped over, they get hit again, then they may rout, or they may just simply rout as a result of combat, and then they're routing off the board. You can try and rally them as you would expect in the game. So hopefully that gives you some sort of idea about some of the mechanics that make this game stand out. I would, in a nutshell, describe it as the chip pool system. Putting the chips in the cup is great, and the fact there's multiple chips per unit formation is great. And then that order system, the combat, cavalry, artillery, forming squares, movement, morale, all that stuff is pretty straightforward. So I thought I'd give you some final thoughts on the game, things that I really enjoyed about this game, things that I like about this game series. And the first is part of that actually, is that it is a series of games, and once you learn the rules and you've played a couple of games, then that obviously opens the door for a lot more Napoleonic battles. The range is quite extensive, not only from this publisher but also in Victis, the French magazine. And even though that magazine is in French and the rules are in French, you can download the English rules from their website. And I've got a handful of those games as well. So that's number one. I love games where once you've learnt those rule set, every time you buy another game, you kind of don't have to learn a new rule set every time. So that's good. Components, brilliant, absolutely brilliant. The map is gorgeous. The counters are easy to read. The rulebook is really well written, nicely laid out. From a component point of view, brilliant. In terms of the mechanics, I love the chip pool system. I enjoy games with the chip pool system. I've used the chip pool system in my own games. It lends itself very well to solitaire play, and lends itself very well to a more sort of dramatic game for two players as well, which I think is great. The command system is, for me, the key mechanic that really separates this game away from a lot of other games that I play. And once you understand that command system, and it honestly takes 10 minutes, just put some counters out and give them, some of them orders, some of them not orders. You'll soon work it out how it works. It's very well explained in the book. That adds itself well to that decision-making process for this game. And I think that's how I would describe this game, is that this game is about making fundamental decisions. Not only where do I move my troops, when do I choose to engage in combat, when do I choose to charge, but also which of my pieces of my army do I want to give orders to, which ones do I think will pass without an order, does it matter if they don't, etc, etc. So that fundamental level of decision making is really, really front and centre of this game. I would say that the game length is great, so the shorter game, 4 hours, so a long evening or an afternoon, the longer game takes longer. I actually leave this game set up and play it over a longer period of time. And partly the reason that this game lends itself well to that type of play is that it's a smaller map, and because of its chipboard mechanic, you don't have to finish a whole turn. You simply pull a chit out, activate a series of counters, and then perform those actions with that series of counters. And then you can kind of do the same again, or you can walk away from the game and get on with other things in your life. So that lends itself really well, and that's how I play a lot of the bigger length games that I have in my collection. So yeah, absolutely brilliant. The level of historic content in the game is great. I probably, perfect world, would have liked a little bit more knowledge of the history in the rulebook. But if you're knowledgeable or you've got a lot of enthusiasm for this historic period, then it's not a problem. That's just, I always like games that have got some historic notes or notes around how the designers have taken these parts of history and applied it into the game mechanics in the game. But other than that, yeah. So overall, this is an excellent game system. It's one of my favourite Napoleonic game systems. I will always play a game in this system. I always enjoy playing it. Excellent quality game, brilliant rulebook. Like I said many times, you just read the rulebook and you go, I understand how this game works. Very rare in this rulebook have I had to reread a section or go to Board Game Geek and ask other people. So in that respect, it's excellent. So yeah, overall, a brilliant game series. The price I paid for this game was quite low. This is definitely one of them, certainly here in the UK anyway, one of the least expensive Napoleonic games. So value for money is absolutely outstanding because it is fundamentally two games. There are two scenarios, but you get double-sided map, and they are really good, meaty scenarios to play. There's plenty of content in the scenarios. There's plenty of decisions to make within those scenarios. So value for money, outstanding. So yeah, overall, brilliant, love it. We'll always play a game in this series. And yeah, that's pretty much it for me. So thank you for watching.